how to get at least a little
Smart.
water. Yeah.
So I think, oops, sorry. This is a problem when I speak too close to the microphone. Okay, so let's restart the meeting. The time now, 11:50 a.m. And so we're going to discuss the next item, which is the 6 years limit on experience hours and associates registration. And then we're going to take a lunch break. I think we're all going to need some energy refuel. So, Roseanne?
Okay, so for 6 year rule, first I want to say that we have a written public comment, and it's a letter. It says written statement, February 9th, 2018. Does everybody have that? It's by Grace Favre, who is an MFT intern. And so we wanted to make you aware of this written comment on the agenda item. So everybody has it? Yes. We will deem it read and part of the record for purposes of the minutes. And then if anybody in the public would like a copy of the written comment as well, it's provided on the back table so that everybody's aware of it. All right, so this topic was talked about back in June, and we're bringing it back. We've done some additional research, and basically our LCSW, LMFT, and LPCC statutes set forth 2 6-year limits for registrants gaining supervised experience hours. The first 6-year limit is the age of the experience hours. Hours must be no more than 6 years old based on the submittal date of the application, and then they expire and do not count toward licensure after an hour is 6 years old. There's one exception to this for LMFT applicants. There are 500 hours of clinical experience, and practicum gained as a trainee is exempt from the 6-year rule requirement. So that's the first 6-year rule. The second 6-year rule is the length of the associate registration. An associate registration can be renewed 5 times, so it can be held for a total of 6 years. If supervised experience has not been completed in that time, or if the person wishes to keep working as an associate and the employer requires the registration, then a new registration can be obtained. However, with a second registration number, a registrant is not permitted to work in a private practice setting. The rationale behind these limits are that they protect the public by ensuring that applicants for a license have recent relevant experience. It also ensures that applicants continue progressing through the licensing process, prohibiting working in a private practice perpetually without ever becoming licensed. Based on the information, the research that we did, it appears both the LMFT and the LCSW programs have historically limited the length of registrations. Initially, it was 5 years, and in 1986, it was increased to 6 years. So the board's standing committees over my tenure here, at least, which has been since 2010, have discussed this topic several times over the past few years based on various requests. And the most recent time was at this committee's June 23rd, 2017 meeting. At that meeting, the committee asked staff to gather some certain specific data about registrations. The committee asked for the number of registrants on a subsequent registration number, the average time to complete supervised experience hours, and then to look into common reasons for needing a subsequent registration number. So for the first item, the number of registrants on a subsequent registration number, we were able to pull the ASW and the AMFT and ASW is currently on a subsequent registration number, and that's shown in Table 1, and what we did is we looked at all current and delinquent registrations for each of those 2 license types, and that's because a delinquent registration could be just somebody that hasn't renewed yet and they're planning to very soon. The first APCCs are just reaching their 6-year mark, so there are very few APCCs on a subsequent registration number, very few, so we did not pull that data. But for AMFTs, about 12.6% of the total registration population is on a subsequent number, and then for ASWs, that number is about 10.5%. So that's the answer to the first question. The second question was a little more complex. we could choose to do it the way we did it in the past, but our Breeze system has some new options and some new limitations. So what we did is, for the time to complete supervised experience hours, we compiled data on the number of years applicants are taking to gain the required supervised experience hours, and that's shown in Table 2. The data is shown by year based on applications evaluated in 2015, 2016, 2017, and then just like the first couple weeks of 2018. So you can almost, that's not really a representative, we just pulled it because we could. And then we compared, we looked at that by year and then overall, and we calculated the mean, the median, and the mode. So what the data shows is that LMFT applicants are taking on average 3.33 years to gain their required supervised experience hours. The median is about 3.02 years. And then LCSW applicants are taking an average of 3.67 years, and the median is 3.19 years. Again, we did not compile the data for LPCC applicants. It would be difficult to get accurate information because that license type hasn't even really had the opportunity to get a subsequent registration number. They're just starting to now. And then the third thing that the committee asked for is common reasons for needing a subsequent registration number. Our board's evaluators talk to registrants every day and have a pretty good pulse on the common reasons for obtaining a subsequent registration number. So we interviewed them, and they cited several reasons. The registrant sometimes stops gaining hours to raise a family, or they become ill and take a break, or they're a caregiver for an ill family member. Some people are working part-time, or they're unable to obtain employment or supervision. Another reason would be they need a registration number for work purposes. Maybe they're in the exam cycle, or they're thinking about applying for licensure or in the process of doing so, but their job just requires a registration number. And then it's, in some cases, a registrant at the end of their 6 years submits their hours, and maybe they're denied a portion of their hours. They had too many non-clinical hours that they submitted, for example, so they need to make up some hours. So they have to make up hours, so they still need a number to do that. We have done some previous research on time to gain experience hours. I want to note that it's not directly comparable because different methods were used at different times, and Breeze was not online at the time that a lot of this research was done, so we can do different things now. In 2014, we just randomly polled 100 LMFT applicants who had recently completed their experience hours, and we have found that about 78% were obtaining their post-degree hours in less than 4 years. The average is about 3.4 years, so pretty consistent there. In 2008, board staff had conducted a study of social work students for all 2002, 2003, and 2004 graduates. And then we have a table. Now this looked at from graduation time to license. With Breeze, we were actually able to look at the time gained to experience hours. But again, that data showed pretty consistently from graduation to license, and then from registration, application, submission to license, that it was taking just about 3 to 4 years to gain experience hours back in 2008. We have several recent and proposed changes to the board's licensing laws that are either phasing in or working through the legislative process that are designed to try to make it more accommodating to the need to obtain supervised experience. We ran a bill a couple of years ago that eliminated what we called the buckets. It's the very specific categories of supervised experience. So now the hours are just clinical and non-clinical that are required. That became effective January 1, 2016. So we're still sort of waiting for some good data on how that's going to work. Also in AB 93, which we discussed earlier today, that will decrease the required experience hours for LCSW applicants from 3,200 to 3,000 hours. So that's the 200 hours that are going away, that works out to about 5 hours full time. So that'll make a little bit of a difference. And then that same bill, AB 93, also allows triadic supervision in lieu of individual supervision for LMFTs, LCSWs, and LPCCs. So at this point, we can open up the discussion about the 2 6-year rules.
Board members, any comments? Not right now. That's I, but Deb and nope. Okay, so let's open up for the public comments.
Hi, thank you. I wanted to thank the BBS and the committee for bringing this up. CAMPT, as well as I'm sure all the other associations here, routinely hear about this from our members as well, so thank you. What I hope is the committee, as you look at this and decide what, if anything, you're going to do moving forward, is that you take into consumer protection, while at the same time trying to assess options that aren't overly draconian for licensees. As far as your statistics, we kind of ran an informal survey 2 years ago that certainly wasn't scientifically backed, but I'd say that our data came back almost identical, so I just thought you'd like to know that. As for the first issue, the age of experience hours, I agree that they should be recent and relevant for consumer protection. The problem is, as you're all discussing, what does that mean? What is recent and relevant? Certainly, we have concerns about people who are serving in the military and or have had health issues that come up that have delayed their ability to get licensed. And so I hope you, whatever decision you do make, I hope it does take into account those 2 groups in particular if some sort of change is created. On the length of the association registration, again, we concur that there shouldn't be an ability to just perpetually work in private practice as a non-licensed individual. A question I had, if I was looking at all your statistics correctly, it looks like about 10 to 12% is the group of people we're talking about. And what I'm curious about, and I don't know that anyone has an answer here, but just something to chew on, is an extension of the 6-year rule, actually for both 6-year rules to, and I'm pulling this out of the air, 7 years. Does that afford the opportunity for the 10 to 12% to be 1% or 0.04%, but still consumer protection? I think if you just open it to 20 years or open it endlessly, I think you're not doing your due diligence on consumer protection. But if you were able, if there was a reason to extend it so that at least you're capturing the vast majority, again, is it down to 2%, something like that, so that you are still ensuring consumer protection, but not unnecessarily burdening pre-licensees. Again, I picked that number out of the air. But is it time, just given it is harder to get jobs, there's more and more pre-licensees, is that something that the board can consider as some sort of logical extension for both of them? Again, it doesn't have to be 7 years, but to me that at least gets more people under that umbrella, as well as continues to ensure consumer protection. So I just hope that would be a conversation I hope you have. I don't know the statistics, but maybe it's time for the board to consider it, because I do know that the 6 years came not a few years ago, but sort of in the recent past, and I think it was extended because it was decided that it wasn't quite long enough. So maybe it's time just for a further conversation on that, and thank you.
Thank you, Kathy. Hi, Ben.
Ben Caldwell, AMFT California. We are on the same page with CAMPT about this. Obviously, you need to balance consumer protection, with the ability for pre-licensees to complete their hours in a reasonable time frame. We hope that part of the discussion will be about, perhaps for both rules, ways in which people might be able to stop the clock within reason. So things like if someone becomes disabled, for example, and then they later recover, but they haven't done any experience in the meantime, that might be a situation where it's appropriate to grant someone an extension. Military service being another great example. I really appreciate this being brought up for discussion today. We are excited to continue the conversation. Thank you.
Andy?
Jeremy Wong, NASW. My recollection is we've always had 6 years. I could be wrong. Looking at her phone, so. Couple of things. First is, if you do anything, I'm not sure extending the years is a good idea without further research and analysis. Picking a number out of the air sounds very fair, but it's very arbitrary and non-scientific. Secondly, if you want to say, well, the hours, the age of the hours is important, you know, this 500 hours that MFT trainees get forever is something should be looked at, because those could get pretty old and you're still counting them. Okay, so you have to think of the internal logic there. Then finally, while we're all very cognizant of life changes where people have life events that affect their career path, their education, etc., in my mind, part of the job of a mental health professional, particularly these disciplines, is really to help people work with life changes. So in many ways, the clients that they see go through all of these life changes that are listed here. So we would expect these professionals to know how to deal with life changes, to plan for them, and to accommodate them. And those are the things that we want to impart to clients, not this idea of, well, something happened to you, so we'll give you an extra year, 2 years, 3 years. So I hope you keep that in mind. I'm very sensitive to veterans, of course, and people having babies, and, you know, they lost their job, so they can't find a job. I get it. But when you think about making exceptions for those people, those are going to be case by case, requiring BBS staff to review each of these cases one by one and make waiver decisions. And I think that's just unreasonable to ask the staff to do. Thank you.
Good afternoon, Madam Chair and members of the committee. My name is Jessica Inoue. I'm a representative with SEIU 10-1. We represent 53,000 public employees in Northern California, and I'm here today as a representative from San Francisco, representing 17,000 members in the city of San Francisco, including a number of LSWs and MFTs. And specifically, we have approximately 80 ASWs and AMFTs that are impacted by the 6-year registration limit. We came here today to comment specifically on the requirement around the law and ethics exam, and so we can have further comment during the public comment portion, but I think that we do want to state our support for the lifting of the 6-year registration, particularly the limiting of our members to receive subsequent registration numbers if they haven't passed the law and ethics exam. And this has become an issue and a challenge for a number of our members. And we also support consumer protections, but we want the board to look at the impact on communities that our members are serving when their continuity of care is disrupted, because our clinicians in San Francisco cannot continue to serve the populations that they serve because they can't get subsequent registration numbers, and that the public health is at stake and also has to be taken into consideration. We can comment more during the public comment period. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Any other comments? So, board member, we have, a couple of the suggestion on the table. One is whether we, there are ways that we can, make some, exception, stop the clock, or whether, we can actually look at, 6 years or 7 years or 10 years, and then I think the other discussion would be, whether we will be continuing allowing, the 6 years rule, and how many times that, it can be done. So, yeah, am I summarize it? No. Okay, good. So thoughts, discussion, preference? Yep, Kim, go.
The do nothing option.
Or do nothing. Right, yeah. So,
When I look at the data that we have before us, when I look that it's only, a small percentage of our population, and that the ultimate end game of what we do as a entity is licensure, it seems like it's working. I also took to heart Jan Lee's comment about life circumstances. That just happens. So if you start putting in, where do you stop and start if you're going to legislate life circumstances? This is okay, but this isn't. But we'll allow this condition, but not that condition, and so on and so forth. So I think that could be a slippery slope if you wanted to go down that path. I don't think getting licensure in 3 years is that onerous, because I think that going in, based on the data. So I don't know. I would, my personal preference would be to let, God willing and legislature willing, all of our proposed changes to supervision go into effect and see how that plays out with, we already have the buckets, that's gone, but then to see how the triadic plays into all of that, and then reducing the LCSW hours and how that helps the process, and then a couple more years in the current examination structure, because one of the things I'm seeing, and I think Steve may have noticed it too, is that once they hit that, once their clinical hours are in, and then they get the law and ethics passed, I mean, it's not that long for licensure. I mean, I think we're adding new licensees at a higher rate than we have ever before. So that suggests to me that we're sort of on the right path, and I'd like to see the rest of it play out first before we start with the 6-year rule. Just my thoughts.
hi, Ben.
Hi. Along the lines of what Kathy was asking, it might be useful, if it's an easy thing to do, to have some additional data about those folks who go to their second registration. How many of those finish their hours within the first year or within the first 2 years of their second registration? I think Kathy raised a good point about if we've got 12.5% of MFT associates on their second registration, if we just extended the time frame to 7 years without even having to deal with exceptions and those kinds of things that are staff intensive, if we just extended the time frame to 7 years, does that bump the proportion down to 2 or 3 or 4%? Because that would seem to resolve potentially a lot of hardship with not too much labor. And Kim, you make a great point about the changes that are already being sort of put into effect, letting them work. So at this point, we would just ask for maybe more information if it's easy to do.
I'd be curious on that stat as well. I don't know if can we grab it?
Well, we can try to tease data out of anything. I mean, but honestly, I think what you'll see is it's really the going on a second registration and such. We might have difficulties because those are probably people that have not applied to, to take, well, they haven't had the hours yet. But so, I mean, I don't know how we'd do that actually, because their hours wouldn't be in yet. So
We can try, maybe.
we can look back at old data, but I have a feeling you're going to see if it's past a subsequent, you're not going to see a lot of people applying for the clinical exam or going forward. It's more lifelong. I think that's what we'll probably see is you'll have a subsequent number, but you're not really have a lot of the population out there on the subsequents that haven't really applied and want to move forward. So, I don't, but yeah, we can definitely look at past data of that would be interesting.
We'll try.
Yeah.
So the 10, so it's about 20-ish%, of the registrants, between AMFT and ASWs. So that would account for probably how many thousands people I'm thinking, so,
Registrants do we have
yeah,
right now?
if we translate that 20-something%, what is about the number of the registration, or of the
Table one.
registrants? Maybe,
Look at the table. She said table 1.
4,060. Nice, thank you. Yeah. So it's right around 5,000 people that, that's on their second registration number.
Right,
Okay.
out of,
Out of, we have,
what is it, 33,000, over 33,000, probably 34,000 registrants?
right, okay. So, so what, so it looks like, we can have, collect more data.
We can try.
We can try it, because I think what would be really interesting also with the examination restructure, whether, with the requirement of, for the licensee, for the registrant to take and pass the law and ethics exam, whether that would actually expedite, with the whole examination restructure, whether it would be able for them to get a license faster. So I'll be actually really interested in, to just wait and see down the road. Maybe we can, collect more data, look at the second subsequence number, see what's going on with those people, and then go from there.
Yeah,
and then
I could see if you wanted to defer the discussion again for another year, just to see how things play out. We
right.
could revisit it again.
Right. And the possibility of, to me, I think what, if I get my wish list, I would like to, have just a length of time and then be able to, forget about, the keep renewing, because it's just really hard, if we want the registrant to keep their information up to date. 6 years is good, but then, they also can opt to, continue, obtain another subsequent number and then be able to continue to practice and never really be able to get, out of that internship, being an associate status, which is really not a really good practice for consumer protection. So, so my wish is that, if we can find a good time, the acceptable length of time, and then also balance that need for the private practice and be able to have just one number and then be done. And I think that would be so, that would be easier on everybody. So that's my take, then, because I am supervising, a lot of the ASWs now that they do have babies, a lot of them, and sickness and a lot of reasons. So, but at the same time, if the average is about 3-something years, and maybe, finding a magic number that would, balance the life events, and yet also, keep their information current and be able to say, this is it. That's my wish list, so.
So on that line, so thinking, so we've got, so we have the buckets were limited 1/1/16, so that's phasing in, and if AB 93 makes the other changes, if it's passed, it will go into effect next January. How much time do you think before we had some really good data from those changes? Like a year?
You're just not going to get it because we don't have the other piece. I think you're looking at, presuming that AB 93 is signed into law for effective next year, I think you're looking at 2 years down the road.
But you can get the subsequent number now, and then just kind of look at it,
Right.
Yeah.
I mean, I think we can look at the number of subsequents that we have, and we can try to do what Ben has suggested to see how many needed that subsequent number, maybe just to finish off the last hours.
Right, exactly.
I don't know if we're going to be able to get it or not, but we can try.
Yeah, so if it's about, 5,000-ish people.
Because I think that's the bigger, to me, that's the bigger concern,
Right.
that I didn't get all my hours within that first 6 years. I just
Exactly.
need a
Right.
few hundred more maybe to finish in my subsequent number.
I think over time, it's very consistent, whether it's camped, camps, data, the older, 10 years ago data, and then our recent data, it's about 3-ish years.
Yeah.
And so, my anticipation is that it may not really change that much. So I think we can look at, take some time to look at, what's happening, with those people who are already obtained a subsequent number, what they're really doing, what the obstacles are, and then go from there. So I'm also even wondering, can we actually maybe even pull those information and do a survey?
So that's, survey?
No, I'm just-
That scares me when you say that word now. No, survey. The data, I was just revisiting whatever I was saying earlier about the data, and we would have to actually, there's no way for us in Breeze to really make the correlation of when they actually, kind of looking at their hours more and when they gain them. Really, all we put in Breeze is their start and end date for their hours. So we can definitely randomly pull, identify some files and kind of do it that way. And just to kind of get we wouldn't be able to pull the data in Breeze, but we can do some sort of manual review of what's going on.
And I think when we looked at this last time, we also included information from other states. Some of them issue what has been suggested, a one-time registration for a specified period of time, then that's it. Christy, do you remember some of those numbers? I want to say 5, 8 years.
Yeah, it really varied from state to state. I think we have to bring that back to really look at it, but there were different models that we could.
Have it right
Oh,
here.
you do? Okay.
Oh, you do?
So, looking at it, some have to redo their questionnaire or their application after 5 years, it looks like. One has a registration good for Nevada, good for 3 years. They may renew one additional time for a total of 6 years. After that, they must submit a completely new application. One state, Texas, valid for 2 years for the registration, can be renewed for up to 6 years. After that, if hours are not gained, they must wait at least 2 years to reapply.
Ooh.
Washington State can be renewed 6 times. They said almost everyone gets it within that time. If they don't, they would register as a similar license type. They have a mental health counselor license and gain the hours under that number. Some states don't have limits or they don't even register. There's a kind of a variation.
Okay, come on. Yes.
I wanted to respond, Madam Chairman, because you talked about hearing more from the small percentage of people who are impacted by the 6-year limit. And we would love to have you and the board hear about some of the experiences of some of the clinicians that we represent in San Francisco. Many of them have been practicing for 10, 15, 20 years. And they are truly a part of the communities that they're serving. They're serving populations who have no other access to mental health services. And there are so many others in San Francisco who can't even access the services because it's so impacted. So the loss of even a small percentage of the ASWs and AMFTs due to not being able to get subsequent registration numbers because of the 6-year rule, that has a real impact on the communities. And if it does appear that the percentage is so low, we would urge you to look at a kind of a waiver or an exception for the small percentage of people so that at least in the public health setting, they can continue to provide service.
So just to be clear, you're talking about people that have been a registrant for 10 or 15, 20 years?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah, and the law and ethics exam is, and I know that that's not the specific topic right now, but that's a new requirement that, and many of these clinicians, they have graduated school a long time ago. They're no longer associated with a graduate school program. And they've been practicing in the community. They have longstanding client relationships in their clinics. And we would seek that some kind of exception or waiver be made.
Thank you. So that's definitely something, we can take into consideration, whether there is any exception, after, let's say, we move on to one-time application and no more renewal, or whether it's like Texas, you have to wait for 2 years. I think there are different modes that, we can certainly talk about. So it looks like, we really haven't been coming up with any conclusion. So should we maybe table it in next year, gather more information, and bring it back to the next PNA meeting? Or not next, but maybe next year. Yeah. And then we use 1 year to really look at, the data and stuff. Okay. Is it acceptable? Do we need a motion for that? Was that? No? No, I don't have to. Okay, great. Awesome. So any other public comments? Okay. What? Okay. Yeah.
Hello, my name is Lucia Hammond. I've been licensed for 27 years. So I'm not here begging for any personal thing, but I would like to invite you to consider that in the public health sector, many of my colleagues, and I don't know if they have had 10 years before graduation or 6 or 7, work with communities that a lot of more academically inclined, licensed, more highfalutin colleagues don't know how to work with. We work with a lot of people in need, a lot of immigrants, a lot of people who have different languages. And we constantly try to recruit from those communities, and with much effort, some members of these communities do get their masters, do their hours, but they have language, class, dominance of English barriers, for which at times when there is something like law and ethics exams and the 12 CEUs and this and that, they don't come scoring on paper like some other of their colleagues, and then repeatedly they don't pass. And so I invite you to consider that between that small percentage, there is people who are actually precious and knowledgeable, but however, probably not proficient in the English language for all sorts of reasons, and they don't pass. Thank you.
Okay. I just want to remind the audience that, our discussion can only happen, in relating to the agenda item for now. So, I understand the concern, and, please wait until, the public comment section, to talk about anything that is, not on the agenda. That would be the section for, for public comments. Okay, so looks like we can go ahead and have lunch, if there's no more discussion. And for now, and it's 12:28. Shall we come back in about an hour so everybody can catch their flight afterwards? 1:30. Okay, so now the time is 12:28, and we will take a break for lunch. Oh,
I've been patiently waiting. I just have to say something only because I have to leave. I got to get my other kids from school. So,
ma'am,
yes.
only if it's about the 6-year limit, nothing to do with anything else, because we only can discuss what item we are currently on.
That's fine, because this is affecting me. So
about the 6-year?
Yes. Okay, and I will be very brief. Thank you. So my name is Shakira, and I work also in San Francisco. And this has affected me. I was out. Was put on an administrative leave on August of last year because my number expired. Okay, and so as a result, and I'm actually second, third. I'm in the later part of the subsequent numbers. Life changes, death, births of children, just all the pressures of being a minority woman. Okay, has come upon me. And so the thing is, I just want to say real quick, it's been very difficult for me not only to raise my kids, but also the finances, the financial part of it, okay? The financial part of it. I've had to pay $100 to get to apply, which I know how to do that, right? Then I took the test one time, failed it, took the test another time, failed it again. And now I'm getting ready to take my test again for the 3rd time. So I'm praying and hoping that I can do this and pass it, okay? But it really has affected me mentally and just all kinds of things. So I just want, my other colleagues are going to talk as well when the public time, when the comments have, when it's time for them to talk. But I just really want to just hope that you can consider and think about having people of color to be a part of your process when you're making these decisions, because it affects us, it affects us. And so we're doing the work that we have to in the trenches, and sometimes we don't get seen, or I should say a lot of times we don't get seen. So I really thank you for this opportunity to speak. I hope that you can consider to talk about, talk with more colleagues of color, so that, especially clinicians, whatever laws you're passing, just to get out there and recruit as many people as you can, who can represent that population or those populations of color. So thank you so much, and you have a wonderful weekend and a day.
So maybe that's another area that's who are those people, the composition,
We don't know.
we don't know, but
We're not gonna know.
oh, yeah, that's right. We don't collect those data. Okay. All right. Okay. Thank you very much for your comments. And let's break for lunch and come back at 1:30. Thank you very much. Again. So let's see. I think we'll give a little time for the people to situate themselves. And okay. All right. Wonderful. So the time now is 11. No. It's 1:47 p.m. post-lunch syndrome. So let's restart our meeting. So the next agenda item is the proposed changes to continuing education regulations, and I believe now is Christy. Thanks.
Yeah. So we're going to be considering some possible changes to our CE and training requirements. There's a few reasons for this. First is that we had made some major changes to our CE program back in 2015, and the transition took place over about a 2.5-year period, which ended recently. So this proposal would delete some of the regulations that served through the transition period, and then would clarify and update some of the current regulations. We are also looking at amending the requirements to obtain an exception from continuing education requirements. So it's a waiver, basically. And would also update and streamline the regulations that require certain coursework to be completed by applicants for licensure, as well as LEPs renewing for the first time. So the existing law regarding continuing education is summarized in attachment A. Basically, all BBS licensees have to do 36 hours every 2 years, except for your initial license period, you have to do 18. And we know that 6 hours of law and ethics for each renewal period. A lot of these changes are technical or clarifying, that kind of thing. The first thing that we were looking to do is to update the list of acceptable providers for certain coursework. A lot of these courses are required actually prior to licensure, but they can be taken through a CE provider, so that's kind of how it came up within this reg package. Those sections hadn't been updated since the new requirements took effect. So we're doing things like saying, instead of a board-approved provider, a board-accepted provider, things like that. So we're kind of streamlining the lists for all these courses into one section. It had been in each individual section. So the next thing that we're doing is the Human Sexuality course that's required prior to licensure. We looked at that, as I looked at that section to update the providers, I looked at the course content and I found a couple of things. Number one, the course had to be taken after January 1st, 1970. So that really, of course, caught my eye. And then I looked at the content and it seemed outdated to me. So I took a look at a couple areas to get some ideas on updating the content And we talked internally too about should we set a new date for when it had to be, but the thought came to if we update the course content, that would kind of force it to be a newer course. So what we looked at other statutes. We also looked at the DSM-5, and I ran it by a subject matter expert as well. So we're adding some things to that definition. You can see on page 177 of your packet under B. We're adding sexual dysfunction, sexual orientation, gender identity, and gender dysphoria. We are also looking to update the content for the alcoholism and other chemical substance dependency class. That one I noticed it mentioned substance dependency, but it didn't mention substance abuse. Those are different things, and I thought that would be a good clarifying. I'm sure all the classes cover it, but it just would make more sense in our law to cover that, to use that term. And then it contains some words like the abuser, so I thought client sounds a little better. So that's really the main thing we're doing there. Then there's some other little clarifying changes. I won't go over those because they're very technical. Looking at number 6, we're going to talk a little bit about getting a waiver of your CE requirements. So back when the board first had continuing education requirements, there was no way to get an exception. There were no inactive licenses or anything like that. We didn't have that status. So they ran up against people for different reasons not doing their CE, and so they came up with and back then most CE there wasn't online yet, or very little was. So for some people having to go to a classroom, depending on their situation, how rural they worked, and I guess there was some accommodation made for people depending on their situation. So there was a whole scheme that was come up with, and it hasn't been updated in many, many years. And especially now, considering you can do your CE online, widely available. So the things that we wanted, and before we delved into this too much, I took a look at what some of the other boards are doing in terms of CE waivers. That is in attachment B. The Board of Psychology requires that there be a total physical or mental disability for at least 1 year during the 2-year renewal period, or a total physical or mental disability of an immediate family member, where the licensee has total responsibility for the care of that person, military service, and then they mention other good cause. So they also do not allow the law and ethics course to be waived, however. And that's something we're going to look at as well. They can exempt all or part of the hours. Anyway, so then the Board of Registered Nursing has similar to the Board of Psychology. Medical board has some very general requirements, and then same with the dental board. So that was helpful in kind of thinking about how we might want to tighten things up, because the way it was written was very loose and not terribly clear. So the first thing that we want to do is just clarify that a CE waiver is temporary, so it's only in effect for one renewal cycle. Doesn't mean they can't apply for one in the future, but that was something that some people think that they're getting a permanent waiver. We want to delete there's a paragraph about reasonable accommodation, and that which was written in there a little bit different than an exception to be granted. So the way they used that accommodation language was for people who needed to do all of their CE hours through what they called self-study. And in our law, there used to be a limit on how much self-study that you could do. That limit is gone. So there's no need for this accommodation language any longer, because that all CE can be completed online. So, and I mean, if you think about it, really, a CE waiver is a sort of an accommodation. It was just that this specific language and phrasing pertained to the self-study. So we're proposing to get rid of that. One thing that we want to tighten up is right now the law says that if you're an active duty military and you're stationed outside of California for at least 1 year, that you don't have to do CE. So there's a couple things here. Number one, in certain military situations, you can completely waive all renewal requirements, including CE, depending on the situations. There's a separate law in the B&P code, general B&P code, that allows for that. But for people who don't fit that situation, we thought, if you're active duty military and you're stationed in, another state, that doesn't stop you from doing CE. You may or may not be practicing, but you do have this other option. So we wanted to tighten that up a little bit, stating that it's only for those stationed outside the U.S. And also that if you're on active duty military, well, I don't want to confuse the two, but also that for some reason you were prevented from accessing CE courses during that time. Right now, the law also says that if you're out of the country for at least 1 year during your renewal period, you can ask for a waiver. And so we tighten that up in the same way. If you are in a situation where you're prevented from accessing CE courses. So in those situations, we're thinking, that's where would you be that you don't have internet access? So it's very few situations, but it would have to be looked at on a case-by-case basis. So you might be in a country that limits internet somehow. So that we know that does happen. I don't think it's terribly frequent, but so we want to at least, I don't know how we would verify that, but at least say that that is the requirement. And there may be some way for at least make them state that and sign under penalty of perjury. And then when we're talking about people who have a physical or mental disability, right now it's very general. They can apply just if they had a mental or physical disability. It doesn't say anything more about it or how severe it has to be. So we wanted to tighten up to be a little bit more like the Board of Psychology's language, where it's a total disability to where they could not practice, or that actually we didn't go that far. We said that they were limited in their ability to practice. So it can't just be that you have a health condition. It has to be that it had a major impact on you to where you could not do your CE, from home, online, So it was different back when people couldn't, had to do it all in person, we feel. Also, for people who are a primary caregiver of an immediate family member, we also want to make that same limitation as to family members with a total physical or mental disability. So not only does you have to, it already says you have to be a primary caregiver, but now we would be adding that it's a total physical or mental disability that they have responsibility for. As I mentioned earlier, Board of Psychologists does not allow the 6-hour law and ethics course to be waived, and so that's the other thing we're proposing, that even if you're given a waiver, that you still have to do that 6-hour law and ethics course. Because the thing you have to think about is they're getting a waiver, but they also have the option to go inactive. So if you're getting a waiver, you're still going to be practicing. So you want to renew with an active license. I couldn't do my CE for this reason. So we felt there may be a consumer protection issue there, and at least they have to do their law and ethics course, because they do have that inactive option. And then we're updating the CE waiver request forms and instructions, and those are all included here. We don't always necessarily give you guys the forms, but these particular forms are incorporated into our actual regulations. So that's why you'll see the forms and instructions there provided. Another thing we're doing is there's an outdated requirement about the alcoholism course that it's mentioned as a CE requirement, but now everybody has to take it to get their license. So everybody who's been through the process now already has it, so it no longer needs to be a CE. I guess I'll just finish up and we can talk about any issues once I get to the end. Number 8 is where I'm at right now. Well, one of the things we want to clarify is that if you take your law and ethics course and it's also designed for supervisors, that is acceptable. We do accept that now. The law doesn't say that is acceptable. We get that question a lot, so we thought we would clarify that. Another thing that happens is that if you teach a CE course that is by one of our board accepted providers, you can count the courses that you taught for your CE. You can only count the course one time, but during your CE. But people teach a lot of classes, and so we thought that maybe there should be a limit on how much CE you can teach during your renewal cycle and have that count. So what we're proposing is 18 of the 36 hours. And there may be some debate on, that was just a number we landed on. Not sure what the right number is there, but there was felt that there would need to be a limitation. The rest of everything else is really technical and non-substantive, so that's that.
Thank you, Christy. This is a lot of cleanup, and yet also the introducing to clarifying the waiver and stuff. So how should we proceed? Because there's a lot of information. So maybe we'll again start with the board members. Any feedback, suggestions? Look good? No? Okay. All right. So let's open to the public. Any feedback from the public? Comments? I think the microphone's not on. Run out of battery, yeah. Yep, okay.
While we're waiting, I should also mention that we are adding a couple of agencies to the list of approval agencies and acceptable providers. So we're adding the California Psychological Association and CAMPT to the board recognized approval agencies. And then we are removing AAMFT California because they are closing as their own chapter, but AAMFT is still on the list in general, just the California chapter.
Thank you, Christy. Go ahead,
Okay,
Kathy.
Wow. So again, thank you for doing this because I think there was clarification needed and we appreciate it because we get confused as well. So thank you. There's a couple things I just kind of wanted to bring up some confusion or things of that nature. On page 170, when we're going through the bullet points, the requirement requesting a waiver due to physical or mental disability be substantially limited. I didn't know if there was a definition or what that meant, or it's just providing feedback that I didn't know how an individual would know if they fall into that category, if there's some kind of clarification or guidance somewhere.
Yeah, let's see here. Okay, so we did, if you look at page 183, let's see. Well,
because the one below, when it talks about a family member, they sort of go into examples.
Yes, yeah. So for the licensee, so a medical has to be a mental disability or a physical or mental disability or medical condition that substantially limited the licensee's ability to practice and complete the required hours of CE. So then if we go to the form, how we've proposed to do the form, which, let's see. This would be
Forms 1, page 194 at the top.
Yeah, so there's two forms here. One is filled out by the licensee, the other would be filled out by their medical provider. So we would be asking the licensee, were you substantially limited in your ability to practice for at least 1 year during your renewal cycle? And how did your condition impact your ability to meet the CE requirements? Then we would also be asking the doctor, or the medical professional, to describe how their condition substantially limited their ability to practice and their ability to complete the required CE, considering all CE can be taken online. So it's, it will be case by case, but it's mostly, we're asking for the doctor to tell us how that.
Okay, but just for feedback for the committee, we get a lot of calls asking what things mean, and I have to be frank, I'd have no idea how to answer this question. Other than to say you should talk to your doctor and they decide. So if there's more guidance down the road, I think that would be helpful. The second point, and I'm sure you said this, Christy, and I missed it, I apologize. On number 9, the change from that only 18 of the 36 hours for someone teaching.
Mm-hmm.
I apologize. What was I didn't hear the rationale behind it. I apologize. I didn't hear it.
Okay, I'll let Roseanne.
So we've had people call up occasionally and say, well, I'm teaching this, 4 or 5 semester unit class. I can use that all as my CE, right? And so, and they teach the same class every, few years. It seemed kind of contrary to the intent of the law to let somebody use all of their CE teaching one course. So we felt that it was prudent to limit it at least somewhat. So they still got some credit, but maybe, if having some other topics mixed in there is a good thing.
Okay, thank you. Sorry, I'm having a hard time reading my own notes here. And then on page 184C, if we could just get clarity, it doesn't have to be today, but we've kind of gone back and forth over the years of whether, for lack of a better word, whether dual licensees can double dip. So if there was just clarity from the BBS on whether that's allowed or not allowed. So if someone's an LPCC and an LCSW or LMFT, and they take law and ethics, do they have to take 2 sets of law and ethics? So
They don't have, if you're duly licensed with us, it's 1 set of CEUs, 36 hours, and it counts for both licenses.
okay, so maybe just put, because we have actually some emails that say both.
Right.
So maybe just a clarification when you're putting out the guidelines or whatever, just so it's.
One caveat to that, as long as it's relevant to both practices.
Right.
Of
Right.
course.
Okay. I think that might be it. Give me 1 second. And then on page 210 for the continuing education course, these are some things that actually, as an approval agency, that we struggle with. So we were looking to clarification from the BBS. Sorry, someone wrote some of this for me, so I'm trying to read their writing as well. On number 1, so different approval agencies use different measurable goals, and so we didn't know if there was any guidance that could be provided on what a measurable, like what is meant by measurable. Sort of same with number 3, the syllabus. Does it have to be a timed outline? Does it need guidelines? So just sort of if the BBS had any information on that, just providing some guidance on what is meant. Our SEPA providers, or excuse me, our SEPA committee who sort of looks at all the providers sort of struggles with these questions. And I can write this up and send it as well, but.
Okay, yeah, that would be helpful if maybe send me an email and I'll see what we can clarify and if,
Okay, great.
Incorporate maybe into our CE brochure or something.
That would be phenomenal. Thank you. Can't read my final note, so I'll try to figure it out if I can read it later. But thank you. So those are just clarifying things that I wanted to bring up. Thank you.
Ben Caldwell, AMFT, California. 2 additional questions I think are just clarifying questions. First, on item number 8, about the law and ethics / supervision courses. Is it current practice that a course designed to both, so like a law and ethics in supervision course, would count toward both of those requirements? I ask because I think we've gotten conflicting guidance over the years on that.
I don't believe so. From how I understand it is that if the course is on law and ethics for supervisors, it can meet the law and ethics course, but I think you still need 6 hours for each. So you would need a separate course to maintain your supervisor. But I would need to, I don't know, Kim, maybe you're more.
In general, I think we would accept it, but I think I want to circle back to my CE analyst and clarify that. But given that we're hearing that question, I think it's a good point that we should clarify.
Well, yeah. From where we are, this is the right direction in which to clarify. If it's a course that is truly a law and ethics in supervision course, then I think from where we sit, that would seem to meet the requirements of both. And then the other thing is just on the removal of AAMFT California Division from that list of accepted providers. I just want to make sure, because yes, the division is dissolving this year, and so we're going away as a sort of separate entity. But for those people who have taken a course from us previously, and then maybe audited a year or two down the road, removing us from that list isn't going to create problems for those folks.
No.
Yeah, we keep we have a library of our old statutes and regs books, and the staff that does the audits, they would know to look for that.
Okay,
yeah.
Great. Thank you very much.
Yeah, you bet.
Thank you. Kathy? Yes, you finally found your handwriting.
I figured out what I meant. I figured out my own chicken scratch. And just quickly, Ben's point about the supervision in law and ethics, we get that question a lot too. And the email that we utilize, we got from the BS saying that they can't count together. So any clarification would be great. Okay, so I had a question, and this might be one I have to email and Kim needs to think on, but the question we had was when an organization like CAMP or CPA or one of those becomes an approval agency, they applied to the BBS and we were approved. And what we utilized was the BBS as here's the BBS's minimum standards, and then we sort of added on, we kind of like these aspects of other approval agencies. And we turned it in and we were approved. If we want to change some of those because they are unnecessary or things of that nature, but they're still above the BBS minimums, is that something, would approval agencies have to reapply?
No, we didn't put a mechanism in to reapply or reassess whether you're doing it. I think, the general intent, as long as you're meeting that baseline, anything above and beyond,
Okay.
that's wonderful.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay, great. Thank you.
Anything else? Christine?
So I just want to kind of reiterate what Kathy said on page 70 about waivers for physical and mental disability being substantially limited in ability to practice. I really think we do need to tie that down. A physician is not going to be able to make that determination. I work with physicians all day long on this particular issue, and they just won't be able to do that. We need to define that.
So, okay, so give what you're thinking is giving the physician some sort of a more.
No, I was thinking more of like defining it for ourselves. What does it mean? Less than 20% of your normal workload, or is it? I mean, I don't know what it would be, but we need to define that for ourselves.
I think you can probably get some guidance, maybe if the OC and DFEH has some kind of guidance on, because we deal with disability in the workplace and how you are considered, have some guidance on that type of stuff. And you might look at that for some language.
Okay.
Oh, Sabrina.
Okay. Maybe a number of hours per week. I don't know. I mean, I don't know what their guidelines say, but yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah.
We're looking at maybe just some additional criteria. I would think we would still want their physician to weigh in on that question, though.
Well, they might be able to certify it, but they're not, because they don't really know what people do. It's very difficult for them to make that decision. So we have to really define it for ourselves, like what does that mean? Because for us, it probably means a percentage of their practice.
Right.
The doctor doesn't have anything to do with that. Yeah.
I'm actually thinking about our last regulations, our ESL. I think that OAL is probably going to ask for some, if not an exact definition, some sort of guidelines that we list too. So I think that that is needed in this case.
Yeah. I think the better, the better the definition, not the definition, but the guidance, say some parameters, what constitute total disability? Is it like critical illness, or is it like, how percentage that person is being affected for their disability per se? So I think, get some clarification would be great, because, my experience is that, sometimes the doctor, when a person is sick, you just tell me what you need to do. I assign them,
Right, and there's people who are very, very sick who are still
Yes,
working.
exactly.
And there's people with a broken leg who
Yes.
can't work. So, I mean, it
Right.
means different things.
Yeah.
Yeah, yeah, right. Or maybe a broken leg is a disability, but it doesn't affect the mental, and they have time to stay home and do the CEU online. So, yeah.
Yeah, I think it was not terribly difficult to define the total physical and mental disability for the family member. They're unable to work and unable to care for themselves, but it's a little bit harder. You're right. It's a little bit wigglier on what does that mean, substantially limited in their ability to practice and complete CE. So we'll do some digging on that and do some thinking.
Anything else? So the total disability, we got some guidance. The supervision, law, and ethics issue, we'll clarify it. And and Kathy's suggestion to clarify some of those evaluation and measurement. And so there are 3 different areas. Apart from that, anything else? Do you, so I guess that we can just bring it back to the staff and draft up the language and incorporate, the feedback today, and then bring it back to the next meeting. Okay. So do we need a vote? No? Okay, great. Samara, I know you're ready to make a motion. Do you have any suggestion?
Like to make it? I saw that you were getting.
You don't need a
We
motion.
don't need it.
We don't need a motion.
We're good. No.
We're good.
You just look like you wanted to.
Yeah, yep,
Yeah, we can bring it back at the April P&A.
at the April PNA meeting.
Okay.
Perfect.
Great though, Christy. Thank you.
Thanks.
A lot of work.
Yeah, this is a lot of details, and I'm really appreciative you found all these old legislation back in 1970.
I was like, whoa.
That is a little too old.
A little
right?
outdated. Yeah, on that topic, boy.
Great. Well, thank you very much, and thanks for the stakeholders for your feedback too. Okay, the next agenda item is the trainee paying for supervision practicum and the survey result. And Roseanne, you're gonna give us a little rundown?
Lead you into the rundown for what we found. So just a little bit of background. At our May 2017 meeting, Dr. Ben Caldwell presented the board with some evidence that some trainee practicum sites, particularly those in the Los Angeles area, are beginning to charge trainees fees to volunteer with their organization or fees for supervision. So the board discussed at that time, they discussed the issue, and they expressed a desire for some further research to find out what was going on, how extensive it was. The board at the time was running a survey for exempt setting committee, so we included a question at that time that was just going out about that time, and we did find some preliminary evidence from that question that some sites were in fact just charging fees. So we were able to do some new surveys and that dug a little deeper into that. So we did 2 different surveys. A school survey, which is shown in attachment A, and that was sent to college and university programs in California that were offering a degree intended to lead to licensure as a marriage and family therapist or LPCC or both. And it asked the school program to answer some questions about the practicum sites where they place their students. The second survey, which is shown in attachment C, was sent to nonprofit agencies that use MFT or PCC trainees in practicum. And it asked about fees charged to trainees and any reasons behind them. And we got those agencies by searching a program called GuideStar, which is a database of nonprofits with some search criteria that they were a tax-exempt nonprofit organization and that they provide mental health services. So I'll go over the school survey results first. And the results are shown in attachment B, the full results. So some highlights: a total of 53 schools in California responded to the survey. About 45% of the respondents said that they were a program preparing students for both LMFT and LPCC licensure. That was the majority of respondents said both. They were asked to report the number of agencies they utilized for students' practicum sites, and we got a wide variation there, probably due to size of the schools, anywhere from using 2 sites to 150 sites. The average number from our respondents, if you average the numbers, it works out to about 26 sites on average. Of the 53 responding schools, 77% reported having no students who pay for practicum. 12, or about 22%, or 12 schools, indicated that some of their practicum sites do charge fees. Of those 12 school programs, on average, 3 of their sites charged a fee. And we did in both surveys, we asked the survey respondents to exclude practicum sites that only charge trainees a fee for fingerprinting or background checks, as those are fairly standard. If a fee is charged, 78% of the school programs report that the trainee pays the fee directly, and 22% of the school programs actually indicated that the school pays the fee, so a small amount there. Of these schools who have some students who pay for practicum, about 10% of the less of the total student body pays for practicum. In general, there were 2 schools that indicated a higher percentage. The majority of the reporting schools indicated that they do not place schools in a practicum sites that charge, or they would discourage its students from choosing such a site. And at this point, schools were asked to list practicum sites that they utilize that charge fees and the corresponding amounts. So we did get some conflicting reports, so it's to be taken with a grain of salt. In a couple of cases, I got a reporting from the agency, so I just used that in this list. But you can see some of them, CalFam Counseling, about $600 a year. Some programs, $1,000 to $1,200 per year, $70 per month. So a little bit of a variety of answers. The schools indicated when we asked if there are any alternatives to paying the fee. One school mentioned a discount for trainees performing office work. Another site provides a discount to Spanish-speaking trainees. And then 83% of the responding school programs reported that their students have the option to work for a practicum site that does not charge fees. It seems like a lot of people misunderstood this question, though, because a lot of them clicked the other option, and then went on to say that students are not charged fees. So it's likely that that's the 83% is a higher number. Most of the schools reported 10 instances that the places where there were fees being charged were in Los Angeles area, followed by Orange County area with 3, and then a few other ones scattered throughout the state, one up north, one in the Bay. Or 2 in the Bay. So 62% of the schools reported seeing no increase in the number of sites that charge fees. 11% reported seeing a slight increase, and 4% a moderate increase. And then I've included some comments in the memo, 2 pro and 2 con, for how they feel about students paying a fee. In terms of the agency survey, that's shown in attachment D, we had a total of 31 nonprofits responding to the survey. Participating agencies reported they use an average of 10 trainees, and most responding agencies, about 84%, stated they don't charge fees. 16% reported that they do charge their trainees the fee. Again, that's excluding fingerprints, background checks. We got some reports of all in the Los Angeles or Southern California area of the fees. $70 per month, $75 per month. One was a $1,000 training course. One had a one-time administrative fee of $150. They offered various alternatives if the student was unable to pay for the traineeship. So in some cases, if there's a hardship, waiving the fee, allowing office work. delaying the payment of the fee or doing it over time, so things like that. Agencies that charge fees strongly indicated that the consequence of not being able to do so would be that services available to their low-income clientele would be impacted. And they emphasized that in many cases, the training opportunities that their agency provided was way more in-depth than what they would get in a graduate program, or it was very specialized to a specific population. So that was our findings, and we can go ahead and discuss.
Board members, any feedback? Maybe we'll hear from Ben.
Ben Caldwell, AMFT California. First of all, Roseanne, staff, thank you for doing this. Thank you for gathering this information. It's very helpful to have. It does seem to support that this is predominantly a Los Angeles, Southern California kind of an issue. And it certainly is a larger trend in the nonprofit world to charge your volunteers for the privilege of volunteering. We continue to have significant concerns about this practice. Some of the agencies that are involved here, in some cases sort of publicly, in some cases privately, have expressed their own concerns about this, understanding the impact on trainees, on access to the profession, et cetera. For those who talk about the impact on services, I understand there's a range of sort of site sizes that are represented here, and in some cases we're talking about sites where the fees that they charge make up a meaningful portion of their budget. At the same time, there's at least one of the sites that's listed here whose annual operating budget is roughly the same size as that of AMFT. So any claims of poverty there would be a little misleading. But really what it comes down to is, do you as a committee have a concern about these fees being potentially exploitive? We do organizationally. And are you interested in pursuing possible policy language that would allow sites to continue to collect fees where it is necessary for them to operate, so they wouldn't have these kinds of impacts on their on the services they provide to vulnerable populations, but would simply, and this is one alternative, it's not the only way to go, but would simply require that they negotiate those fees directly with the universities rather than with the trainees themselves. That was an option that we had mentioned, I think, at a previous meeting a year or so ago. But the larger question is it a problem for which you are interested in pursuing policy solutions? We're hopeful that the answer is yes. We don't pretend to know what a singular ideal policy solution would be, but considering the level of financial impact here, and the fact that for many of these sites where they say that there's kind of a waiver process if somebody can't afford their fee, they don't tell people that. You won't find it on their websites. You won't find it in their initial employment documentation. We are interested in continuing the conversation about possible policy solutions here. But we're not interested in doing that at the expense of underserved populations being served. We think that there is a balance to be struck.
Thanks, Ben. Christine?
I know we've talked about this before, but I guess my question for Kim would be, what do we have jurisdiction over?
Well, the trainees are not ours till they're registered, but in terms of the school, I mean, we put the curriculum requirements in law, and then we leave it up to the schools to figure out how to implement that and spread that across their degree program, as well as what's included in a practicum program. I do want to add that recently Roseanne, Christy, and I and Steve met with representatives a few weeks ago from Southern California Counseling Center, Maple Center, and I think it was the Open Path Center, and there was another one there too. We met with 4 or 5 different people, and we talked about, in conjunction with the exempt setting, and some of the ideas we're kicking around with that group, and then as well as this issue in particular. And What I would say is that we learned a great deal from that conversation, and that was just a sampling in Southern California. We walked away thinking, gosh, we need to talk to people in Northern California too. But what struck me as interesting is that the fee that in particular Southern California was charging pays for some additional training. I think it was EMDR or that costs more than their training budget, and so the $70 fee kind of offsets it. They also stated, as well as the other organizations, that charging the fee isn't limiting the number of trainees that are placed there. There's a waiting list, or people are lined up to get in because they are providing good training. So I think what it comes down to, from just a very optic, just bare bones perspective, yeah, that's terrible to walk into a practicum site and go, oh yeah, you're going to get hit with $70. I think at least providing that information up front to the students so they can make an informed decision, whether that be at the beginning of the second year, which is what some of the results said, or just prior to sending them out there. I think that's a little late. But giving them that information up front so that they know that, okay, I'm going to pay this for my graduate program, but I'm also going to have these additional fees.
So we would have jurisdiction to make that happen?
No, you can encourage it. No.
So why are we having the discussion?
Well, because it was brought to us to have the discussion.
Okay, so nuts and bolts,
Nuts and
bottom
bolts,
line.
we
Let's
don't-
just say we wanted to. What could we do?
I think that would be really interesting. Honestly, I don't know, because we don't regulate the schools. We don't say you're an approved school, because we don't approve the school. WASP does, or the accreditation group does, or private post-secondary does. So
There's really nothing
We could put in some encouragement language.
Yeah.
Like we do for personal psychotherapy with supervisors are supposed to encourage personal psychotherapy. I mean, we could do something like that about schools. But we don't, there's not really any way to enforce that, that I can see.
no, we would have a hard time. I don't know, unless you guys have ideas.
So Kathy with Camped, I don't agree with the policy. I'm saying you can do. What you can always do is you can always tie it to the hours, meaning the hours obtained by the trainee versus that you have no jurisdiction over the agency, certainly, but you do have jurisdiction over the hours they're obtaining while they're there. So for example, I believe the Board of Psychology has something along the lines, and I know I'm misquoting it, but you can't gain hours if you pay for supervision. That's not it, but it's something along those lines. We would not advocate for that because I think there'd be many unintended consequences, but certainly if you did do policy, you could tie it to the hours versus the agency. Simply along what Ben said is we do think it's an issue. We do see some pre-licensees being exploited. I think there's training facilities out there that are absolutely doing a great job and the fees are understandable, and there's training facilities out there that are exploiting their pre-licensees unnecessarily. This is one of those, like I said, we see the complaint and we have not come up with, nor do we have a reasonable solution to the problem, but the fact that it's on the BBS's radar is at a minimum, I think, appreciated, because by it being on the BBS's radar, I think that as agencies are putting together their formula, they will think harder about how to do it. CAMP does our best to try to educate both the employer and the pre-licensee of sort of, here's what we think the labor board might do, here's where you might run afoul, things of that nature. But again, just being on your agenda and your radar, I think, helps keep facilities having a desire to do things above board. So thank you.
Quick question, Kathy and Ben, maybe, I don't know if you have the answer to that. Do you know if this is being discussed at the MFT consortium groups at all, and if they have any?
Since the beginning of time, it's being discussed generally, but because there really isn't a good answer because you have two very opposing opinions.
Because the consortium is made up of schools, right?
And agencies.
And the agencies, and so that to me, that seems where the issue is. It's
when it comes up, it's a heated.
Yeah. I'm sure.
So, yeah. But thank you.
Okay.
Yeah, when it comes up at the consortium, as it often does, particularly in the Los Angeles consortium, it is, as you can imagine, a fairly tense topic. The consortium is a great place for discussion of issues like that, but Christine, you had a great question about sort of what is our authority, what can we do? Well, the consortium has effectively none, so we can discuss it, we can sort of shine a light on it to the degree that we can, but at the end of the day, the consortium doesn't have any teeth over anybody to say, we'd prefer you do it this way versus this way. The fact that it's been a subject of discussion, I think, is good and will continue to be. But it being discussed there doesn't tend to result in any kind of meaningful change.
So before you leave, thank you. So she said, well, you could tie it to the hours and, but we wouldn't advocate for that. So, I mean, what can we do?
You do have authority over trainee experience, and you pretty heavily regulate trainee experience, and you can, you regulate the supervision that one goes through when they are a trainee. There's a requirement that there be the agreement between site and supervisee and supervisor and school, what we commonly call a four-way agreement. I share Kathy's concern about unintended consequences if you were to simply tie it to the hours. But whether it's encouragement language or whether there's some other kind of creative way of linking it to the trainee experience and avoiding those unintended consequences. I do think there are policy solutions here that are both possible and within your jurisdiction. I'm not going to pretend to you that I have one to present today. I don't. But I do think it's possible.
Thanks.
Thank you.
Christina?
Andy?
Janley Wong, NASW. First of all, I don't think this is actually in your purview or jurisdiction. These are private schools or public nonprofit schools. These are private agencies or public nonprofit agencies. You don't have jurisdiction over them. You also don't have any jurisdiction between the interaction of a student who's paying fees or tuition or whatever you want to call it, professional fees, and the agency or the university. You just don't have any jurisdiction there, nor do you want to get into that. That's going down the rabbit hole. But I do want to propose a solution because I think that this is kind of what people are asking, why are we talking about this? I'm asking that myself. So the solution is what we do in social work. We promulgate standards for practice settings. We promulgate standards for practice settings. So these are professionals, some of them are licensed, some are not, who work together in committees to develop standards for practice settings. These practice standards articulate what is good practice in these settings. So I'd encourage the MFT industry to look to their own devices, particularly the academics, and come up with some standards for what is a good practice agency and setting, what are good practices in those settings, and then push those. And of course, agencies can agree or not agree to follow those practice standards, but there is a lot of pressure if you have these professional standards and you find out an agency is not following these professional standards.
Hi, Deb.
I absolutely agree with Mr. Wong. But just to follow up, I also agree with Ben in that when things are happening in the industry that somehow have an impact on what we may do or who we oversee as licensees, that it should be brought to our attention. And I thank you for bringing it to our attention. We've had many people in the tenure that I've been up here who bring things that we might not necessarily legislate or get involved in, but it's kind of nice to know what's going on in the community, and if they don't bring it forward, we may never know. So for that, and thank you staff for, because the MFT community brought it up as a concern. The staff followed through. Great survey. We have results now, so we do know what's going on. But on the other hand, like Mr. Wong said, at this point, unless you're willing to move forward and somehow do I think Ben was asking, maybe look into some kind of a policy or something like that, which we don't even know if we have the purview for such a thing. I think this is where, and that we say thank you for the information, keep us apprised, and we move forward.
Oh, I have one.
Or maybe I'm missing something.
No, you're good. So I have a question. So, in the MFT and the LPCC law, we do have sections to describe what an internship, the kind of activities allowed, right? Is that accurate? Yeah.
Yeah, we have
So, yeah. Right.
that they have to.
We say that they have to meet certain qualifications under supervision.
Right, but it's that part when they count hours. Is
Only LMFTs count hours per degree, so we only have jurisdiction over them in terms of that, because LPCCs do not.
Oh, LPCC don't.
No.
Okay.
No pre-degree
So
hours.
it's only LMFT.
Yeah.
So, and I'm wondering, whether, if I like the, setting the standard, even though we don't have the jurisdiction, because I think it's important for, to give guidelines, since, we are one of those, one of the agency who set the standards. So, if we provide some sort of parameters, what we constitute, a good practice for an agency, when they take student intern, it's almost like, not necessarily like the code of ethics for agency, but at the same time, it will be a good thing for them to, to look at. It's like what, we want to, I don't know. I'm just kind of thinking out loud.
Yeah, but I don't know that that's necessarily our place to do,
yes.
because now that we're jumping into an employment setting, we have absolutely no purview there, none. So I think Ganley is onto something, but I think that has to come from the professional association,
Right.
not. I don't know.
I'm thinking on the line of from the student's angle, since, we do provide some standard about, what an internship should look like, and then there would be, there's something that we can tighten up from that angle instead of monitoring the agency, but we, tell the student, what is, I don't know, what is ethical, what not.
We do, for LMFT and LPCC, there is that three-way agreement, which in most schools do a four-way agreement, but that is one of our requirements. So, I mean, we do have some, we've never taken action against a school for not having one of those agreements in place. It's not something we do, but we do have, we do require that agreement. So, I mean, there are some things in our law that do regulate it, and also in the exempt setting committee, we are, for a different reason, looking at practice settings for trainees because of the issue of it's not as well defined, is because we don't have a definition of private practice versus not. So we are looking at some of those components through the other committee. There are some things that are somewhat regulated, but this particular issue, it's really difficult to see where that would fit in, other than maybe requiring, maybe as part of the three-way or four-way agreement, maybe there could be a line in there that, where the fee is disclosed. I mean, I don't know. I was just trying to kind of think through where else we're.
And I
delving into.
from the survey results, I didn't get that, I didn't see that disclosure is a problem. It seems to be being disclosed, and a lot of times students will seek out that agency because it offers something in particular that they want. And it seems in most cases the option not to pay, maybe not for every single person. So I kind of agree with Jane Lee that it's sort of a best practices
Yeah.
sort of thing, and I don't know what our authority is to designate best practices.
Ben?
Yeah, Ben Caldwell, AMFT California. Just in the interest of kind of allowing us to move forward with other topics, what I can do is I can take this issue back to what's left of the division, and then AAMFT sort of more broadly for some additional thought. It did occur to me that if you're looking at sort of avenues of jurisdiction without being punitive on trainees, you do have jurisdiction over supervisors. And that one of the things maybe for our group to go back and discuss if we're looking at sort of policy options to propose, is there a way of meaningfully determining what kind of a payment arrangement for practicum might be acceptable and truly for additional training versus something that is more exploitive in nature, and then making it unprofessional conduct for a supervisor to be involved in an exploitive employment arrangement. So that's not a proposal in front of you at this point,
Right.
but just saying that there may be other avenues that would be within your jurisdiction. But we'll take it back and we'll give it some more thought.
Okay.
So Ben, before you leave, I just want to, ask your professional opinion. So, because we talked about, the word exploited, keep bringing up. So, and then I also see that there's some trainees that they need to contribute time, for the agency. And I assume that these two things go hand in hand. So I just want to be a little bit more concrete, understanding what really it means in the context of exploitive activities in nature. Are they required to take more clients than they should? I want to, seek your opinion.
I think you're asking a very good question. It's a question I'm not sure that I have a great answer to. I think when we look at issues of exploitation of pre-licensed therapists, I think we have a larger issue of places that are not abiding by labor law. We hear regularly about people who are offered positions that are ostensibly paid positions that then don't even pay minimum wage. So that kind of thing is a more clear-cut case of exploitation. You're asking for in a situation like this, where these trainees are paying for their practicum or being asked to donate a certain amount of additional time beyond their clinical work, it seems like you're asking, would that be considered exploitive? I think the answer is probably it depends, but I'm not sure how hard and fast of a rule I could give you to say what it depends on. My sort of subjective impression is that some of these placements probably are exploitive and some of them probably are not. But it's, again, a hard and fast line is hard to find here.
Thank you. Yeah, so it looks like, the professional organizations are going to take them back and maybe discuss some more, trying to refine some of the possible areas that can come up with some policy directions. I think that's good. So any other comments from the board members? No, okay. So I guess that we can just wait until, more information to come. Okay, thank you very much, Ben and everybody. So our next agenda item is legislative update.
All right. So this coming week, next week, legislation is in the process of being introduced. The introduction deadline is actually the end of next week. So we are diligently looking at all the legislation and seeing if what is introduced that we might need to have the board take a look at in April and May. That being said, we are currently pursuing 3 legislative proposals. Of course, AB 93, which we discussed extensively today, that, as I mentioned earlier, needs board approval of the new language to move forward. So we'll be looking at that in February, in 2 weeks, February 22nd. A little bit of news on our second bill, our license processing bill. And this is kind of a few different issues that the board approved back in August and November about the licensing process. That bill has been introduced as of yesterday. It is AB 2117. The author is Assemblymember Arambula, and so we'll be moving forward with that bill as well. And then our omnibus legislation, that'll be introduced shortly. That doesn't have the same deadline, so it's usually introduced a little bit later than other bills. The majority of our proposals for the omnibus bill were accepted. There's still kind of a question mark. They have not decided yet on the MFT referral services piece. So if they don't accept that, the option is to either try to find a different author, which may be difficult, try to put it in AB 2117, which I'm kind of not sure if that would work, or find an author next year. So we're kind of need to wait and see how that plays out. But that is where we are with our legislation.
Thank you very much. This is exciting. New legislation sometimes is really good. All right. So the next one, and it's rulemaking update. And Christy.
Thank you. So we have several reg packages that have been approved by the board that are in different stages of the process. The first one is the one that deals with the section of regs that talk about application processing times and also dealing with registrant advertising. The registrant advertising piece was necessary because of the change from intern to associate, and that will specify the abbreviations that they can use. It's actually now at OAL and awaiting approval, and it will have an immediate implementation date once they approve it. The intention was for this to be implemented January 1st, but this was one of the first ones that had to go through the new DCA process with the initial review phase, which took added about 4 months to the process. So the next reg package deals with gathering contact information, specifying application requirements, and also setting some parameters when there's been an incapacitated or deceased supervisor. This was approved by the board in March 2017, and it's within the initial review phase by DCA. I followed up to see where it's at in that process. They've had it for quite a while. And then the next step will be for it to go to OAL to publish the notice, and then we'll get that rolling. The enforcement regs, which update the disciplinary process and update the our disciplinary guidelines, is actually now at OAL for noticing. No, it's not. Oh, it's still in DCA. I'm sorry. I thought I'd asked you about that. Oh, okay. Okay.
And that one is still going through DCA review. It's in legal right now.
My apologies. Somehow I got that mixed up. Okay. The other package is it's sort of a combination of several small reg efforts. It's dealing with examination rescoring, application abandonment, and a subsequent registration fee for APCCs. It was approved by the board in November, so we're currently preparing all the documents to get it ready for the initial review phase.
And then I'm going to add, at the next board meeting, I'm going to provide a timeline of all our regulation packages under this new procedure, because it's a little difficult to tell, although Christie's reporting information is very thorough. I'll point to the enforcement regulation. The board approved that almost a year ago, and it has not even been noticed yet. And we know that from the time it's noticed, it takes nearly a year to get things through. So, while well-intended, the initial review process that DCA has implemented does not appear to be streamlining anything. In fact, it's adding time. And we can point to our application processing time as another victim of that. That should have been in effect to coincide with the effective date of January 1, 18 with the law, but that's not happened. And now we're having calls about how to advertise. So that's a problem. The other reg package that Christy talked about is the contact information. That was approved nearly a year ago, and we have not had the 45-day comment period yet. So we're still, almost a year later, we're still doing a review, the initial review. Now, after the 45-day comment period, and we do all of that, it's got to go back to DCA and go through the same review process all over again.
So it might take very long time.
You're looking at almost 2 years now.
Right before
it gets effective.
So including the time of, waited already,
We
So
already
we're
have
talking about
a
three.
year or
Yeah,
more,
right.
are knocking on the door of a year for these proposals. Some of them are, the enforcement one is consumer protection related.
Absolutely.
You have how to advertise, that's pertinent to all of our stakeholders out there so that they can comply to the law. The reg process and rulemaking process is lengthy anyway, but usually you could count on it not taking more than a year. But we're not there now. We're not there at all. So, in the spirit of being transparent about what's truly happening, I'll be providing a timeline chart for your review. And you can see when things get submitted to the specific entities for review and the dates that they are submitted, and you can see. And that's not to say that we send it up there and Roseanne and Christy don't do anything with it. They monthly check in, monthly reminders.
That would be a good education for us, knowing the whole process
I
and
think
the
you'll be very
timeline.
surprised.
Yeah.
And not very happy.
We'll be waiting for the board meetings, your next board meeting for that little education piece.
I meant to bring it today, but I forgot.
Ben?
Ben Caldwell, AMFT California. Kathy Atkins from CAMP had to leave, but she asked me to pass along a note related to the contact information regulation package. The piece in there about what happens when a registrant's supervisor dies or is incapacitated, they, like we, get questions about that all the time. So she just asked me to pass along a note of appreciation for your continued pursuit of that package, even though it certainly takes a long time. We're very grateful for it, and once it gets approved, it will be, I think, very helpful. I also wanted to confirm that I heard correctly on the application processing times and registrant advertising. Did I hear that will be effective immediately once approved, as opposed to having to wait for the beginning of the next quarter? And if so, any guesses when that might be?
My guess would be it's at OAL now, so it's usually 30 days, right?
30
So
days.
within the next month.
And it's with OAL and Department of Finance, correct?
with OAL
They're reviewing
Finance.
it concurrently.
Yes.
Like
So-
30 business days. It's not
Yeah,
actual
not
calendar
calendar.
days.
So we actually have a time period to work with. So
Okay, that's good.
it's not in perpetuity. They have 30 days to make a decision.
And is it safe to say that we would then have a decision by what, end of March? I don't know when those 30 days
Yeah.
started.
Yeah, that would be
And that's provided they like the language.
Sure.
Because they could have a concern with the language and we could be back to square one.
Yeah, I know. Thank you.
Wow. So we only can hope for the best now. Even though we know that we have been waiting.
Everybody cross your fingers and rub your lucky rabbit's foot. Yeah.
Exactly. Hi, Dean.
On that topic, are we, since our new terminology for interns becoming associates is already in force, are we safe to work from the draft regulation and tell people be sure and write out the full name, the acronym, and because I'm getting a lot of questions.
The draft provides a good guideline. Also, I believe as of a couple of days ago, we've put some guidance advising people on what to do in the meantime on the website.
Oh, you did?
In the same place as the registrant advertising, just saying we're waiting for the regulations. Here are the titles and that we're
Because the
recommending.
last time I looked, it was still the old.
It was just added, I want to say
This
end
week.
of last week that it went out. So check that again, but it's, in order for us to update this is what you have to do material, our advertising guidelines, it has to be in the law for us to actually update that document. So we can only really put advisory statements right now.
In the interim, nobody will be in trouble because they're doing it wrong.
Yeah, but they're printing their business cards.
I
You
know,
how
we feel their frustration.
Hey, thank you very much for the feedback. So the next agenda item is the suggestion for future agenda items. And so I know so let's make it brief and clear and to the point. Yeah.
One sentence.
Oh, no, just make it simple. Yeah.
Well, today
Yeah.
we discussed the impact of the 2017 law regarding assessment and diagnosis for in-state applicants. I would like to request a deeper review of denials of the out-of-state applicants due to lack of these courses.
Thank you, Dean. Hi.
Good afternoon. My name is Emma Gerald with the SEIU 1021. And we are obviously here to talk about issues regarding the law and ethics exam. And we would like to see this committee agendize that item at a later date. And specifically, and I believe this would be a change in the regulations to allow subsequent registration for those who have not been able to pass the exam after multiple tries when their numbers have expired, so that their employment and client care is not interrupted. So that is our request to you. Thank you.
Thank you. Any other comments? Actually, items. Not comments, sorry. Making very sure we cannot comment. Right. So any other future agenda items? One more, okay.
I'm not sure if this is the right committee for this, but if there could be an allowance for an additional ESL accommodation to allow for the employer to deem that person needing an ESL accommodation other than the other three ways that you can obtain one. Yep.
Thank you very much. So any other future agenda item? Okay, very good. So let's see. Public comments for items not on the agenda. We've done it. Yeah, so make sure that, you make it simple and brief. Thank you.
Okay, sure. I already introduced myself a couple of times. I probably don't need to do that. I want to make sure that our members who have traveled here today have the time to share with you what their experience has been. We do have a letter that we were hoping to submit to the committee. Is that all right? As I have already stated, our members serve a very diverse population in San Francisco, an often underserved population. Many people of color and poor people are served by our clinicians, and any disruption in their care is unfortunate, and we urge the committee to look at what can be done to provide exemption or waiver for our members who are having a hard time passing the law and ethics exam and need subsequent registration to continue to practice in San Francisco. Our members practice in dozens of mental health and primary health clinics throughout San Francisco. They are embedded in every single neighborhood in the city of San Francisco. They have long-standing relationships with the communities and other nonprofits and other community groups in the community, as well as the members of the communities. And a very wide range of diverse programs that our members work with. We have about 80 ASWs and AMFTs, many of whom have passed the law and ethics exam, but many of whom are coming up on the expiration of their registration or subsequent registrations, and their employment is in jeopardy. if they are not able to pass the law and ethics exam. We have outlined a number of issues with the law and ethics exam that our members have raised to us, and they're laid out in the letter. My colleague Emma just talked about the ESL accommodation. We would really like you to include the employer to verify somebody's eligibility for the ESL accommodation for the law and ethics exam. The 90-day waiting period causes it causes a delay in people being able to pass the exam. It causes great expense. They're already required to take the 12 CEU requirement for law and ethics. And we would like you to consider that the 12 CEUs be credit for the law and ethics exam, and the exam not be contingent on the registration, a subsequent registration. Our members, many of whom provide therapy and counseling in languages other than English. Many of them are from immigrant communities. And we have great concerns about biases in the exam that disproportionately impact people of color and people whose first language is not English, and that we think that, and other socioeconomic factors, and we think that the exam should be reviewed for any biases like that. Our members would like to have more specific feedback about areas of the exam that they have not passed, and the provision of free or low-cost study and test prep resources for the exam. And we also feel that the BBS website is very difficult to navigate, and often the information about the requirements is hard to find, or there are contradictory information in various parts of the website, and so that should really be streamlined. A handbook or something of the sort should be created for the registrants. We appreciate your attention and your consideration for our concerns. We do hope that we can have this item agendized for further discussion. Thank you.
Thank you very much for your comments. Anything else?
Hi, good afternoon. My name is Jaime Arcila, and I work for the county. I have been in mental health for the past 35 years. I hold a license in France and one in Colombia, and I'm struggling to get in a license here.
Put it closer to the microphone so that we can hear it.
I want to run down a little bit what really happened with this examination, because it's not for lack of practice or knowledge, but really what happened is that it's an English examination. This is not a law and ethics, it's an English examination in which you need to fight with dangling participle, displacement modifiers, then split commas, and all sorts of semantic tricks that are within the questions. Now, it's fine that they are there. I accustomed in French, in Spanish, or in Portuguese, I can read it, but I need time. So when you read a question that is tricky, it takes you 2 to 3 minutes. When you multiply that by 15% of the questions that are experimental in the test, to feed and validate the test to canvas for the next examination, then you waste 45 minutes. And then you need to run through, applying your best to read in English. So this is not fair. PCI, Psychological Service Incorporated, is outsourced from the Board of Behavioral Science, so you don't have purview over them. The same with the universities in down California. So how we're going to deal with people who are in the money-making business? All these tricky questions are impacting directly the families Or for example, in December, there was a fire in San Francisco. I was working at a big building where 3 families were Portuguese, a lot of families Spanish speaking, and guess what? After December the 1st, I couldn't work anymore. So now I'm paying out of my own pocket. And I believe that this is not a law and ethics. I have working for YGC, for the prevention department, for the emergency response. And when you come to see it, it's an English examination. So I invite you to take the examination in another language with tricky questions that have split modifiers, dangling participle, and all sort of rhetorical and semantic tricks. And then you will see what happened in Spanish or French when you need to take the same examination. Again, the psychological, the PCI, the Psychological Service Incorporated, is in the business of making money.
Well, thank you very much for your comment.
Thank you.
Okay. So please make it brief. If things has been said, please, introduce new ideas, new comments.
Hi, everybody. My name is Doris. I came here for political reasons almost 40 years ago. I never dreamed to be a social worker. I was invited to be applying, for the program because I love to be helping people. I worked for the city, come to San Francisco with elders. I went to San Francisco State, got my master's degree, an MA in gerontology. The challenges that I found with the tests are that the questions are kind of tricky, like Jaime says, it's not going to the point. So sometimes you have to choose the wrong answer because that will be the right one. They're asking you, and Thursday, suppose it's an example, Thursday, this is the day that you had to do this, but we have Wednesday, and then you think it's Wednesday, but then it's Thursday, kind of very confusing. I didn't learn English, tricky English, if you know a foreign language, you know that it's not easy, and you know that they don't teach you, the tricky, all the game that's involved with subtle messages. So it is a challenge, but more than that, if I don't pass the second test, I might probably lose my job. If I'm not at my work, my clients are gonna suffer. I work mainly with seniors who are poor, monolingual, low income, and right now they're facing, massive, attack, not only from people who are kind of racist, but even for the government directly, for the White House. I'm not ashamed to say that. So what is my concern if I don't pass the test? My clients are going to have more problems. They're already having, problems at their home, families are being destroyed, and not having somebody to whom and vent their problems and get help. I don't know what's going to be. So I'm asking you to, if you're going to do the test, be more clear. Because I wonder if you know a foreign language, if you can pass, a foreign language exam with tricky questions. That's it.
Thank you very much.
Good afternoon. I have a loud voice. I am a radio program person, so I talk in the radio pretty loud for people to hear me. My name is Ellen Lee Zhao. I am from San Francisco, and I'm not selling myself right here, but I am a San Francisco mayor candidate. We have 8 mayor candidates. I'm proudly to say that I'm here to advocate for my SEIU 10-1 members. The reason I am here, I have been very vocal and advocate for many of the members. I am one of the members that they talk about, the 80 members with the city and county of San Francisco. Last year, I wrote many letters. The year before, I wrote many letters. The year before, for the last 8 years, I have been writing a lot of letters to you guys and letting you know it is not fair for a bilingual person to take the test, over and over to be intimidated because of our language. It's not that we are 3-year-old, that we are new from school, that we don't know how to do the job. It is the exam itself, it's very messy. I took many of the preparation courses, I paid them. I did real well online, I did real well in person. When I took the exam, I always failed, not a lot. I lost a lot of sleep. It made me just stupid. I felt stupid every time I I failed the exam. I was born and raised in China. I came here in high school. I am very thankful you gave me the extra hours to take the exam. The first 2 times I failed. I advocate for more time. I did. I got it. Thank you. But here's the problem that I've been going through. English is my 4th dialect. I speak Toisanese when I grow up. I speak Cantonese when I talk to people. I went to school in China and spoke Mandarin. In our Chinese language, we don't have past tense, future tense. You talk in just tense, 1 tense. The language itself just gave me a headache, but I'm very important in my Chinese community. In fact, I am nominated by my community to run for mayor on the Chinese behalf. I have a radio show on a weekly basis, and I had approximately 100 radio audience. I have been doing that since 2011. I am here to ask you to think about what you do and the questions you intimidate, not only me, but the other people who are bilingual. We have 200 questions. You purposely put 25 extra in there for no reason. We spend a lot of extra time, 4 times of the amount, for no reason. I have been writing to you guys, why? Why test on adults who are professionals and treat us like a 3-year-old? That's number 1. If you want to do experiment somewhere else. Just give us the true question and we are done with the true question. That is called democracy in America. It's American democracy. Number 2, I compare our state level, the DMV. The DMV have 4 to 6 versions of the DMV driver's license exam. When I failed, I was given the answers to go, and it taught me to be smarter next time. I took 2 times of my driver's license exam. The last written exam, I was 100% correct because I was taught to do it correctly. The ASW exam, the LSW exam, I repeatedly took it over and over and over and over. I never had someone to tell me, excuse me, which one I get wrong, excuse me, which part I get right. I spent thousands of dollars just to do the exam. And I'm not the only one, and we are City and County of San Francisco. We annually train employees to be appropriate with law and ethics. We have our own compliance. We have our own annual HIPAA training, and we all cover, and we all pass our exam to get our jobs. What you're giving us is not a humanity services.
So, excuse me, it's been almost 5 minutes. So do you mind to wrap it up?
Yes.
Yeah.
I appreciate your time. Like I said, I think stuff in 4 different languages. I am here to ask you to think about the people that we presented to you, the 80 people we have. Make exception for government agencies because we have our own regulation annually. And also, in the 1990s, I came to Sacramento State. I passed my exam for life insurance. I did it the first time, the similar exam, because we were trained by the agency and gave us the answer, and what's right and what's wrong. I'm asking you today, do not let the agency take advantage of us. We paid thousands of dollars to learn the wrong answer. Even you pass me, I passed my law and ethics exam. I still don't know which one I was right, which one I was wrong. You sitting in here, give putting the public at risk. We are not protected because I am not informed which one that I did so right.
Thank you.
Which one I did it so wrong.
Yeah.
We are not protected. I'm just letting you know.
Thank you very
And
much.
thank you for the time, and thank you for thinking of us that we are bilingual. Like I said, I'm very important to my family. And I need my job to go on. I have 2 college kids. And I'm very important to you.
Thank you.
And thank you.
Thanks. So if you don't mind, keep it brief and simple and to the point. Thank you very much.
Hi, my name is Delphina Hardy. I'm an LVN at the jails in San Francisco, and I'm an executive board member for the healthcare for SEIU. I don't have a challenge with the ASW or the MTF, but my thing is my coworkers are being put on leave if they don't pass this exam in enough time. And it has impacted them for months. And some of them are even, if they don't pass it, like in the next 60 days, they're going to be separated from the job. And that's a big impact to see them have to start over, to find a job, to not be able to take care of their families. And it concerned me coming from the lower level projects and stuff, that if you get a job and you try to change your life and it's getting better, and all of a sudden 30 years after you've been taking working and stuff, and then it's like, do I start over? Where I'm gonna go? I mean, can I get AFDC? Can I get welfare? What? I mean, what can we get from there besides unemployment for temporarily? So it's causing a big impact. And I don't know if it's on the San Francisco side where there's some kind of misinterpretation of the legislation, or if it's the board, or some things need to be changed. But I would like to see my coworkers back to work, and I want to try to find an answer for my coworkers. And if we can add our issues to the March agenda, it would be very helpful, so we can at least find some answers and probably clean up some legislation like I heard earlier. And that's it. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Anybody else?
And my apology, I misunderstood you before. I'm Lucia Hammond. I thought that was public, and that's why I was here. I am an LMFT, sitting in County, San Francisco. I'm speaking on behalf of my colleagues who are taking the test and failing, and take the test and failing. I myself am trilingual. I struggle, doing my licenses, etc. But I figure that the type of testing and hardship, because I helped a few train, that they're going through is really excessive, especially for providers who are in the public sector, who have all sorts of law and ethics and monitoring around them. And they're very experienced in the front line, and the more we become experienced in the front line, the more we lose sometimes the academic lingo while we know the laws and the ethics. So it's constituting an hardship on clients who really need those kind of providers and not others. It's constituting an hardship on the providers themselves, because $500 a pop every time you want to train yourselves is becoming an industry for others, and it's like everybody's a consumer and everybody is a little bit under a huge amount of strain because of this exceedingly lengthy and tricky examination that could be streamlined and made more adequate for the job we do, which work in the public sector with the poorest of the poor. And with our community, we need us and not people with different faces or accents. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Good afternoon. My name is Emma Gerald. I work for SEIU 1021, and I will speak on issues that other people haven't spoken, and I will try to keep it brief. Regarding the 90-day waiting period, this is something that if you fail the test and you have to wait 90 days, this is something that maybe would not be difficult for the board to fix. My understanding is that the reason for that 90-day waiting period is because another exam has to be basically redone, reorganized, or what have you. And the issue is that people have studied for the exam, they take the exam, they fail the exam. Sometimes they fail the exam just barely. but all that study material is still in their head, and they could easily take it again and probably pass. Instead, they have to wait 90 days, and usually more than 90 days, because you can't sign up for the exam until after 90 days, and so then you have to wait for dates when you can sign up for the exam. And so it's longer than 90 days. And in the meantime, if you do not have your registration number, in some of our member situations, you're not working, because the registration number in the public health, in San Francisco public health setting, is a condition of employment. And so that's why this 90 days is so important, and I think it's something that could possibly fixed easily administratively. I know that we represent a lot of different classifications that have licenses, and for example, if someone doesn't pass the RN certification, you can get back in line and do it right away. So that would be an immediate ask that we would ask. And then obviously the item that we asked to put on the agenda would actually resolve this issue. And thank you so much for your time today.
Thank you.
Good afternoon, and thank you for bearing with us. I know everybody must be tired right now, because I sure am. My name is Al Fernandez, and I'm a veteran of the United States Marine Corps in 1975. I am a practitioner, ASW. I've worked in the field for over 35 years. I've worked with children, SED kids, juvenile kids in juvenile hall, adults in child, adolescent, adult psychiatry from Marin County, San Francisco, Mills Peninsula, and Burlingame, California. And I was privileged to come on with the city 20 years ago at juvenile drug court. I've worked with many, many, many people, and I know that there's been a lot of lives that have been saved. I'm also an executive board member of SEIU Local 1021. As a representative of 1021, I represent 62 clinics in San Francisco, both mental health and public health. And again, I feel the passion in this room because many people's jobs are online, their livelihoods are online, and it's devastating for anyone who feels they're in a great career, but if you don't pass a 70-question test, your livelihood can be taken right under your feet. Now, how would that be when I know that I help people all day long and I have to tell them, I'm sorry, I won't see you anymore? And they would be devastated by saying, what are you talking about? You've helped me and I need you. And I'm saying, I'm sorry because I didn't pass a 70-question test and my livelihood is gone now. It's quite devastating if you're in our shoes, because it's easy to say, oh yeah, just go pass this test and you're good. But if you're having problems passing the test and you're taking it over and over, and there's no feedback of where you go wrong, but the broad question of just study law and ethics. Well, how far do we go in studying the law and ethics? Can you tell me where I go wrong? My colleague just said that at DMV, they at least give you, this is what you did wrong, this is what you did wrong, go study that, come back when you get it right, and then you come back and get it right. We shouldn't be burdened as employees that love what we do and helping people all day long to have to go and rack our brain wild trying to pass a test. And I understand, you want the test, that's fine. But as an older man, I still can hear. And I have a listening ear. And Madam Chairman, I heard you before lunch break. And you said that we should make this test a lot easier so that people could pass it, get their registration, and keep moving on with their employment in helping to serve the most fragile, medically ill people in the city and county of San Francisco. That being said, I thank you very much for hearing us all today. I appreciate your work that you do, but please, please take ear, like mine, to what we're saying, because again, we want to do the best job possible to help the most medically fragile on the front line, and we do all day long. But I'm asking this board to reconsider or to pressure point the issue of getting the test that people can pass so that we don't have to come back here. And this, I'm so happy that he did come. Now I know where the board is, right? But either way it goes, thank you again. Appreciate your ear.
Thank you very much. Anyone else? Okay. Well, looks like we are coming to the very end. So the time now, let's see, is
Can I just say something real
Yes.
fast? I just like to
not
say.
to respond. Not to respond.
No,
We're
this
not
is just a blanket
Okay.
comment. I'm not going to have engage in a conversation. I just want to say thank you for coming today, and thank you for sitting through the entire meeting all day long. This is a process, a democratic process, and if we can all just sit back and appreciate that part, because we still have it. Thank you for coming.
And I want to spend, also appreciate you guys having so patient, and listening to, all the other agenda items. So safe travel back to San Francisco, and hope the traffic is light. And, definitely hope to see you guys again. Thank you so much. And the time now, again, 3:31 p.m. and we're closed. Thank you so much.